I'm so delighted to welcome you all to be with us for this very exciting and historic moment. We find this a very special day in the life of Rhodes College. Being able to welcome Reverend James Lawson, who is a hero to us all. And being able to welcome him to do what he cares about most, and that is to talk with students, to have a conversation with students, is very special to us. We also are honored to be able to use this gathering as an occasion to honor Dr. Lawson with what is Rhodes College's highest honor, an honorary degree. Our Board of Trustees had voted earlier in the year to invite Reverend Lawson to accept this degree, and he very kindly said yes, which does great honor to us. And so we are able to have this occasion. So as we go through this ceremony, you have to picture that we are surrounded by the entire Board of Trustees. They are here in spirit. Fortunately, Trustee Dan Hatzenbuehler, class of 71, is here in body as well as spirit, and he will formally offer this induction on behalf of the board. My colleagues, Professor Gary Lindquist and Professor Loretta Jackson Hayes, who serve as faculty marshals and do the honors of leading us through these kinds of formal processes, are also here to assist us. So you are here to witness something very special and unusual. Rhodes does not do this very often. And then we will have the great pleasure and honor of a conversation. So we're going to go through this ceremony, and then at its completion, we will step over there, we will defrock, not spiritually, or fully, but we will take off our robes, and then you will return and you will work your magic with us and among us. So thank you so much for being here. And so Dan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Madam President, I have the heartfelt privilege to present the Reverend Dr. James Morris Lawson, Jr., who has been unanimously recommended by the Rhodes Board of Trustees as a candidate for the honorary degree.
Reverend Lawson, today we honor you for a lifetime of service as a dedicated activist and leader of the civil rights movement. James Morris Lawson was born in Pennsylvania and raised in Ohio. The sixth of 9 children, he became a third-generation Methodist minister. During his first year as a student at Baldwin Wallace College in Ohio, he served prison time for refusing to serve in the U.S. military when drafted, after which he returned to school to finish his degree. Reverend Lawson is no stranger to facing jail time for his convictions. After graduating, he spent time in India as a Methodist missionary, where he encountered Gandhi's teachings on nonviolent resistance. Upon returning to the United States, he attended the Graduate School of Theology at Oberlin College in Ohio for a year before his vocational journey brought him south to Tennessee. He attended Vanderbilt University for 2 years before being expelled for his actions on civil rights in 1960. Nonetheless, he still managed to earn the Bachelor of Sacred Theology degree from Boston University during that same year. While in Nashville, he began directing nonviolence training workshops for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in his church basement. He went on to mentor countless students, training a generation of activists and leaders of the civil rights movement, including Congressman John Lewis. Their training sessions were soon put to the test in 1959 and 1960 with the launching of the Nashville sit-ins, which were later credited with disrupting segregation laws and practices. With this momentum, Reverend Lawson focused his energy next on formulating the strategy for the Freedom Riders, even joining the Riders on a journey to Alabama, where they encountered violent racism and incarceration. Lawson's mentorship of those students reverberated through the early years of the 1960s, as his students went on to lead the Open Theater Movement, the Freedom Rides, the 1963 March on Washington, the 1965 Selma Voting Rights Movement, the Mississippi Freedom Summer, and the anti-Vietnam movement, just to name a few. Reverend Lawson served as a pastor of Centenary Methodist Church here in Memphis upon moving to the city in 1962. In 1968, when the sanitation workers began the Memphis sanitation strike for higher wages, safety, and union recognition, Reverend Lawson served as chairman of their strike committee. Reverend Lawson, however, was not done. After moving to Los Angeles in 1974, he became pastor of the Holman United Church until retiring in 1999. You do not look very retired to me. He remained incredibly active in other social movements and human rights issues, including reproductive choice, gay rights, economic justice, immigration rights, rights of Palestinians, and the right to a living wage. He returned to Tennessee, continuing his tradition of mentorship by hosting a program on civil resistance with the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. Reverend Lawson's life is a beautiful testament to his convictions and the principles of nonviolent resistance. His work paved the way towards creating more equitable communities through his inspired work and his mentorship of others, even, perhaps especially, when it demanded personal sacrifice and courage. In this cultural and political moment, where we see continued inequities and violence against the oppressed and marginalized throughout the world, his example remains incredibly relevant. His life of action inspires a call to each of us and reminds us to advocate for justice in our communities, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and to do, quite simply, what is right. Our students need leaders like Reverend Lawson who exemplify noble character and display visionary leadership. In a world that can often seem dark, Reverend Lawson's life shines a very bright light. As we reflect this week, in particular, on the 50 years that have passed since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, we find ourselves filled with new hope and new determination as we face the next 50 years. Reverend Lawson, you embody what we value here at Rhodes College: lifelong compassion and personal integrity. We are honored to honor your legacy. Therefore, by the authority vested in me by the trustees of this college and the state of Tennessee, I hereby confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Humanities, honoris causa. Thank you. I know that many of our students and alumni are now delighted to welcome you as their classmate and as a fellow Lynx. I noticed Vanderbilt didn't give you a degree, but Rhodes College has. So we are very, very proud to have you inside the family that is Rhodes College.
Well,
we
thank
will
you.
take a moment. We will help
Okay.
take off these heavy robes, and then Dr. Lawson, class of 2018, will be delighted to address you. So we'll step over here.
Well, thank you, President Haas, for those fine words, and to the trustees for conferring on me this highest honor from Rhodes. And I've always had admiration for this college. When I came in 1962 as pastor of Centenary United Methodist Church, and I also had the privilege of visiting the college on a number of occasions. And at that time, Rhodes College students, under the title of Southwestern, could use the campus is at Centenary at a time when that was not possible at Rhodes and elsewhere in the city. And in fact, that was a stirring and wonderful experience. So I've felt close to this campus for years and had the privilege of having a number of students affiliate themselves with Centenary, and at least 2 or 3 sing in our Centenary choir and a part of our music ministry. And I remain in touch with one of those students who became a lawyer and now lives in Howard Romaine, lives in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know what class he was of, but Howard and I have remained in touch and associated in various ways. So I'm very, very grateful to count myself as a part of this Rhodes College community and family. And I appreciate especially the warm welcome that you've given me this afternoon. Now, I'm not sure what you want me to say, but I thought I might start, since there are so many students here, by suggesting to you, and I'm sure that you probably already know this, and that you have been instructed and taught in these ways since you've been here. But the first thing I want to suggest to you is that you are in a particular stage of life and journey that can be a marvelous and wondrous experience, because it is very often during these years that you move from childhood and from one family of life to becoming your own self-contained self and life. And so I'm going to begin by simply saying that your life is of great preciousness in the universe. Your life has great uniqueness and great similarities to life everywhere. Your life has been created in such a fashion, given to you, that it contains both some of the debris, as some biologist in the 20th century said, each of us has in our very body debris from the Big Bang. Debris that stretches back 700, 800,000 years or more in the long, long journey of our struggle. And this is where a lot of modernity in the United States, especially, I think, since I know this situation the best, likes to believe that the world we fashioned has no responsibility for the human family or for the race, the human race. But you must remember, and I assume that's one of the reasons you're here, that the human species journeyed for more than 800,000 years to get you to this place. And that there's wisdom and power there without which we human beings do a lot of things that we ought not to be doing today. But on the other side of the coin, we have the great potential to be in harmony and consonance with eternity, the universe, the gift of life, and can make it our very own. And so I push you hard at the point of taking hold of your life and seizing it and accepting it and recognizing it came through a long legacy of your immediate parents and grandparents and great-grandparents in a lineage that stretches far back, more than you can find that background, more than any of us know. And that gift is the most precious possession you have, especially if you exploit it and live it. The human race has not reached the full potential. On the contrary, we have dark forces, spiritual wickedness, the Methodists like to say, that have kept us persistently in a plight and in chaos and confusion, so that you and I are part of a nation where we have spent, since the year 2003, $6 trillion for single war in Iraq. This is the report from a study by Harvard University about 2 years ago. $6 trillion since 2003. We have devastated a nation of only about 25 million people. They were an emerging modern nation in the midst of that part of the world. We have wasted a very fine medical system, a very fine educational system. I visited there a decade or so ago. We have destroyed a network of children's hospitals. At one period there, we saw the death through our sanctions and the free zone pathway where we bombed constantly. At one point, we saw the death, according to the United Nations, of 500,000 children because of our sanctions and because of the way in which we had devastated the children's hospital network and deprived that medical system of medicine and a great variety of other needs. Now that's with the cost of $6 trillion. Now, there is a grotesque loss of a sense of perspective of our humanity when in the 2018, we have all sorts of budget passing and tax giveaways and all the rest of it, and not a single word about the messiness, the almost immoral matter of having spent and continuing to spend $6 trillion on one war. But then, in those same years, Congress and the presidents have been unwilling to fund Head Start fully. So that Head Start is still only about 40%, 45% of the budget that could be used for our 4-year-olds across the country in every haven of our land. So I simply say this to make the point that a large part of this silence over this misspending of public money is connected to the fact of people who have allowed themselves to grow. I'll use one of my favorite illustrations. We've allowed ourselves to grow with a hole in our soul, so that we have diminished our capacity to be alive and human, and allowed ourselves to be taken over by mythologies and lies and the rest of it, and forms of work, violence and the rest, that cannot bless us and is not blessing anyone in the world. So I urge in these your college and university years, you make certain you claim your life and discover your gifts, and you cultivate and nurture them. Discover who you are and who you can become. You may not imagine any of that, but without that, your life will be filled probably with chaos and confusion. With that, you cannot imagine what the possibilities are for living and for existing, for doing, for working. Understand that nonviolent struggle begins there. Nonviolent power begins there. Your yes or no to the world, to life, begins there. It's similar to a good basketball team, where every member of the team must commit themselves to the game and to the strategy and to the basics and the extraordinary hard work and to the common discipline to work together as a team and to play their game and to play the game to the best of their ability. That's personal engagement. And nonviolence works from the premise that a tyrant and tyranny exist always, and this is a number of political philosophers of the past, but it's also, most importantly, Gandhi in the 20th century. Tyrants and tyrannies exist with the consent of the people of the land where those tyrants and tyrannies operate. And that the moment people act with the power of their capacity to live a life that can say yes or no, and that says no to such tyranny at that moment, tyranny is in danger. So maybe the second thing I want to say is that our country is in its present plight. I'm going to say for two basic reasons. One, we're in the plight because we have, as a people, across 400, nearly 500 years, in this journey, in this territory, in this land, we have, on the one side, participated in the most spectacular experiment of the human family in political history. The experiment of deciding that this land would not be a land of tyranny and oppression, but it would be a land where people could govern themselves. This is the meaning of a 10-year period, which is often not being taught, between 1765 and 1777. A 10-year period where every colony of the 13 colonies had major conversations going on with all kinds of people, including women, including black people, including Indian people, in which they formed the common philosophy: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. I ask you the question, why isn't that preamble to the Declaration of Independence? Why doesn't that form our political language, our public conversation? When we debate democracy or freedom, when we debate world issues, when we debate the economy, why isn't that common philosophy? The third president of the United States, John Adams, said that before 1776, all 13 colonies had made by a sizable consensus the decision that they wanted to be a free and independent people, depending upon one another to govern the colony, to govern themselves. Now, there are all kinds of problems of that, but the point is, they came out of a world of intense tyranny and oppression. All the governance on whatever continent was primarily a governance of the top down, and of the male over the female, and of the powerful and the rich over everyone else. Almost every government on every continent. That experiment was unique in its very being, though I've read some histories across the years that have suggested that it began with Greek democracy or Roman. Well, not at all, because both of those empires had a democracy of only the elite. In some ways, we are like that, because if we have a democracy, it is a democracy of the wealthy and the powerful. It's not a democracy where ordinary people like ourselves have a share in some of the life-shattering decisions that the nations make. Who made the decision in the 60s, 70s that the manufacturing industry would be decimated and jobs would be sent overseas, whole factories would be sent to Mexico and elsewhere across the earth? Who made that decision? It was never a public discussion. Some people fought such battles in places like Memphis and Los Angeles and Racine, Wisconsin, and Sewickley, Pennsylvania. I've read about some of those over the years. But fundamentally, there was no congressional debate. The presidents during that period of time did not object. This decision was made by an economy that had in itself and permeating its thought economic tyranny for our country as a whole. It was similar to the decisions of 1619 to establish slavery as a model of labor in our land. So the point I'm making is that it was an astonishing moment and period when ordinary people, mostly from Europe, but also from Africa, also from North America, made the decision that we hold these truths to be self-evident. The second thing I want to say is cause for our issues now is that in spite of that declaration that we are going to be a free people, we took the land from some 13 to 15 million people across who were inhabitants here. I remember reading in high school in the history books how there were so few people here, or just a few thousand. Well, the anthropologists and historians of our land have, in the 20th century especially, tried to help us learn that there were probably close to 15 million people in this land when the settlements began. And in that settlement, we decimated a people with violence and other methods. We said their languages were inferior, their culture was no good, their religion was bad. And that's where we began this business within the territory of despising some people in the land. This is the basis for the outrageous racism that then was solidified and codified with slavery for 250 years, and then with the codes after the Civil War. So through racism, through decimation of a people, we poured a spiritual poison into our society. And then I'm going to add to that spiritual poison the poison of insisting that women are an inferior species of life. So one of the first martyrs in our land was a Mary Dyer, hung in 1655 by Massachusetts because she practiced her Quaker conscience in Massachusetts. You can find her statue in the Boston Green in New England. Then we pulled off trials of women who were speaking out and living independently on their own and managing their families in their ways, and called them witches, and we hung them. We inherit the ideologies of that largely from Europe, but that despising of women helped to spread and increase the poison that we're feeling today. And then we established a society in which violence enforced these grievances that we ignored and pretended did not exist. Then the third major factor in our plight is this, that in 1960 our society permitted the use of the politics of assassination. I'm going to name just 5 people, but we assassinated 5 men: John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers. There are a number of others, but I use these 5. One of the most important things about this is that these 5 men, black and white, were men who were emerging with a fresh vision of what a United States could become. And I know for a fact, in my own reading and studying and investigation, that I can say without reservation, James Earl Ray did not shoot Martin Luther King Jr. to a moral certainty beyond a shadow of doubt. There is a transcript of the independent investigations and that have fundamentally a court transcript from Memphis called The 13th Juror that indicates that James Earl Ray needs to be exonerated because he was not the shooter and he was not the plotter in the assassination of Martin King. But the point I'm making is that these men were vigorous intellectually, morally, and otherwise, and they were emerging not only as critics of our land, but they were emerging as people who were offering us a variety of forms of leadership that could make a difference. Without the politics of assassination, we would not have the presidential succession that we've had. So where history was changed forever in terms of the politics of our nation at that point. So if we have chaos and confusion, we, the public, have not put upon the table the issues that need to be examined if we are to develop a clarity through the chaos and the confusion. And so the last thing that I'm going to raise is that this is a kind of a context for you're trying to understand Martin Luther King Jr. and the emergence, not of the civil rights movement, but of the nonviolent movement of America. The Rosa Parks, Martin King struggle, which should not be, cannot be typed as civil rights, must be typed instead as a major movement, almost 20 years of it, of major campaigns in which ordinary people like ourselves, in the streets, in direct action, we called for freedom. We called for justice. We called for equality of life. We called for dismantling the old shackles and giving space to ourselves and to others for new emerging signs of democracy and justice and truth. Almost in no campaign that I participated in, whether it was St. Augustine, Florida, or Danville, Virginia, or Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Louisville, Kentucky, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in almost no campaign where I was a consultant and supporter did I hear that often, the word civil rights. That was not our language. The sanitation strike here in Memphis, we were talking about safety, the rotten environment. These men here in 68 worked 67 to 80 hours of work and lived in sometimes abject poverty because the wages were so bad. They called their job the plantation, oftentimes. they've helped me to recognize that our economy has moved through plantation capitalism. We've never given up the ideology of that. We've never given up the violence of that. We've never given up the economic exploitation and injustice of that. We've never given up our arrogance that that's the best system in the world, economically. And so if 1/2 of the American people, 160 million people, live with an intense daily push against their condition, economic, food-wise, shelter-wise, educational-wise, is it because 3 men in the United States have the net worth of property and money of the lower 160 million half of our nation, the people? Is that a major issue that needs to be addressed? The nonviolent campaign I want to propose to you should not be called civil rights. It should be called the Black Freedom Movement, the Black Justice Movement. It should be called, as John Meacham in Time magazine said, that it was, in fact, the second major campaign of the American people for the purposes of getting more freedom and more democracy and more quality of life established as the direction of the society. It could be called the USA Nonviolent Movement of America. Nonviolence is an ancient matter. While the term was coined only around 1906 in South Africa by Gandhi, the idea is quite ancient. You find the first non-cooperation with a king in the first chapter of the book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible, where the midwives refused to obey Pharaoh, who told them to see to it that at the place of birth of a boy slave, that baby boy should be killed, should come out dead. And they would not do it. That's non-cooperation with the king. The first strike that we know of, such as the one that occurred in Memphis, occurred in the year 1170, when workers on some of the construction projects of Pharaoh refused to work because of their grievances on the job, in the work. So these are ancient things that many people used across the face of the earth, but the whole push of the warrior culture, the whole push of the efficacy of war has driven that prospect, that aspect of human history out of sight. And one of the things that Gandhi did was simply to gather in his 50-year experience, much of that experience, and coin it satyagraha, nonviolence, soul force, the energy of the universe that we humans have at our fingertips if we're prepared to use it. And so if at the other side you think I'm too pessimistic, that's all right. But if you want to continue to say progress has been made, I agree. This kind of meeting could not have happened on these grounds in 1962, 1970. They were not happening. So one of the things that's different is that the movement of which I was a part elsewhere and here in Memphis began to chip away at the business of dismantling the forces of spiritual wickedness. And we did it without hate. We did it without fearing the outcome. We had confidence in the outcome. We did it without having to despise any other people. So I simply want to say to you that, in fact, we of the human race have need to move from our obsession and love of violence in all its varied forms and masks, and begin to dismantle it in our hearts and lives, in our families, in our immediate communities, wherever we live, in our work and play. We need to begin to dismantle it, because the issue for us is, will we move towards being a nonviolent society, a society of compassion, where in ideologies or mythologies, as well as in structures by which we live and work, we demonstrate through them the equality of all and the sacredness of all human life, and our capacity of human beings to make decisions that can reshape the direction of our nation. If you want to celebrate this death of Martin Luther King Jr., I would say to you, the way for it to happen for each of us is to dig deep on the inside and determine that no matter what happens in our lives, this one self-contained life that is mine will be on the side of the human race, on the side of truth, on the side of beauty, on the side of justice, on the side of dismantling the old that tortures human life, and on the side of allowing new forms of living in truth and peace to emerge. In some ways, without the dismantling, the new will not really appear large enough for us to see and hear and feel. My own conviction is that these forces that we're fearful of, the wars, the violence, plantation capitalism, racism, sexism, cannot prevail. We may take all ourselves down by submitting ourselves to them. I personally prefer the struggle to say no and yes to a different vision and to a different way of living. So that's all I'll say at this point.